Well, this is Dr. Stan back here at Radio Liberty, coming to you from the hills overlooking beautiful and picturesque Monterey Bay, and bringing you the news behind the news, the story behind the story, hoping to convince you that reality is usually scoffed at and that illusion is usually king. But in the battle for survival of Western civilization, it's going to be reality, not illusion or delusion, that will determine what the future will bring. And I did to remind you the views that are expressed here are not necessarily those of the owners, management, staff, sponsors, or supporters of the station you're listening to. They happen to be my views, and, well, for the next hour, they're going to be the views of our good friend, Joel Skousen. Hi, Joel. How are we doing?
Well, I'm a little bit incapacitated, but not enough to keep me from coming on your radio show.
Oh, well, I hope, now, do you need some antibiotic or vitamin D3 or something like that to get you back on your feet?
Well, we'll have to talk after the interview.
All right, fine. Well, anyway, I'm sorry I said that you're not feeling up to par, but so glad that you're with us because so many exciting things are happening, and so I want you to give us your view of what is taking place. Certainly, I mean, basically we could look at any one of these issues, whether it's happening in Middle East, the Near East, or what's happening certainly in economically in Europe, in the United States. All of these things are going to have a profound impact on everybody listening in this audience, and believe me, you're not going to get the truth through the controlled media. So, Joel, you pick up the story and tell us what you think the issues are and your interpretation of them.
Well, let's start with the problems in the European Union and the world economy. And not a few pundits on the right side of economic analysis, that is the Austrian free market school, have declared that the European Monetary Union is in danger of imminent breakup, that Greece, Spain, and Portugal will ultimately default on some or all of their bonds, but there's no chance of any other outcome. Well, technically, I think they're correct, Stan, just as Peter Schiff and others here in America have said. Eventually the fiat dollar will collapse in value. But collapse envisions something very rapid, and that isn't going to happen despite what the doomsayers all claim. Almost none of the best and the brightest of the American right understand that we're not dealing with simple economic fundamentals here, which demand such a collapse. We are dealing with a conspiracy of power. We talked a lot about that and how it related to 9/11 last week. But it's still operating even in almost every aspect of our lives. They underestimate the ability to create money at will to keep the corrupt systems they've created from collapsing rapidly. They also have the power to create wars and other crises to divert blame to world circumstances rather than themselves. And as my long-term readers know, and your listeners know, I'm in the school of those who predict a slow downhill slide rather than a rapid collapse, mostly because people grossly underestimate how much money creation the Fed and the European Central Bank, the ECB, can do and still not show up as hyperinflation. Now, eventually it will, but they can keep this up for almost another decade. Watching the weekly events in the European bailout almost proved my point. They don't have a central bank with the same bonding and monetary creation powers as the Fed, and yet they are morphing or changing that way rapidly as each crisis pushes smaller member nations to accept any alternative to default.
And I think this is really so vitally important. The thing is that they are going to, I believe, use this crisis to force all of the countries to give up their sovereignty and go along with this. Either that or they'll be destroyed economically and plunged into chaos. And so countries are going to go along with this because we're really dealing with what I think is a conspiracy to bring about a world government. Would you more or less agree with that?
Absolutely, Stan.
Okay, go right ahead.
And I certainly don't approve of, well, let me just state, first of all, as I think we've gone over before, I'm really amazed at how few analysts on our side of the political spectrum even look at the one key factor that determines hyperinflation, the size of the monetary base compared to the money created each year by government. Of course, the larger the base, the more the Fed can inflate without showing up as high inflation. And with minimal estimates of $200 trillion for outstanding U.S. dollars in print worldwide, and that doesn't include the $500 trillion or so estimated for non-monetized contracts.
Hold that thought. Hold that thought. We'll be right back. Well, this is Dr. Stan, and our guest this afternoon is Joel Skousen, and certainly most people are predicting that there is going to be a collapse of Greece, and certainly by all rights this is what should happen, and the pig nations should go down because of their fiscal mismanagement. But as Joel is pointing out, and our guest today is Joel Skousen from World Affairs Brief, we're not dealing with simply normal economic times or normal economic laws. We're dealing with a small group of very powerful and wealthy people who are going to use this conflict and this crisis situation to increase the power of the government over in Europe. Now, basically, the plan has always been to have a strong central government where all nations are forced to join. Most nations don't want to give up their sovereignty. The German people don't want to give up their sovereignty. Certainly the Greek don't want to give up their sovereignty, nor the Italians, nor the Spanish, nor the Portuguese, nor the French. But you see, they're going to use this crisis situation, it is Joel's opinion, and mine as well, to defy the people and say, look, if you don't go along with this, the sky is going to fall, why everything's going to be plunged into chaos. You've just got to give us additional power, and we will be able to certainly keep this thing going. Give us the power, and of course you'll avoid pain and chaos and of course inflation. Just give us the power. And unfortunately, since most of the political organizations over there are controlled and the media is controlled, and the average person in Europe has no idea what we're talking about, this small cabal that really runs things, both political parties behind the scenes in almost every nation. Go right ahead, Joel.
Well, and one of the problems is that you have people like Angela Merkel, who's a globalist, Nicolas Sarkozy, who talk to the people as if they're against all these things in order to stay in political power, and yet they're for them. And they always acquiesce to them, but they resist and they resist and they say, oh, the crisis, so we'll just have to do this. I mean, it's a very slick process. For example, two major events happened this week in the world financial realm. One, Switzerland decided to peg its currency to the euro. The Swiss franc has long time been a powerhouse of strong currency. Even though not a member of the European monetary community, the Swiss acceded to the pleadings of the EU to help the euro keep up its facade as a strong currency. By pegging it, that means the euro will no longer go down in relationship to the Swiss. And the Swiss say that they're doing this for the benefit of their export community. The two currencies now, the Swiss franc, will not float anymore in relationship to one another, and obviously the more the euro inflates, the more it will go down in value. The euro will appear to be stable, but that comes at a price for the Swiss people.
Hold that thought. We're going to be back in just a moment here. Well, this is Dr. Stan, and certainly Joel is simply pointing out that the Swiss government is going to peg their Swiss franc to the European currency. And that means, of course, that Switzerland is going to lose its economic freedom from the point of view. It's going to have to go along with what the European Union is doing because they justify this. We have to, of course, put a cap on the Swiss franc. We cannot let it simply float or it'll go too high and then we lose all of our exports. In other words, it'll hurt our economy. So they use this as a justification, of course, to make the first step towards the loss of their sovereignty. Because when you begin to peg your currency to somebody else's currency, you are no longer a sovereign nation. Go right ahead there, Joe.
Well, Switzerland will be forced to print more currency to keep its own currency weak rather than strong. That helps the export industry, but it hurts Swiss citizens because most of everything, or a lot of everything in Switzerland is imported from the European Union. So everything will get more expensive for the people. The smaller segment, the export, the big businessmen, will gain, but the common citizen will lose. And that's much the way that we get hurt here by continually devaluing the dollar around the world, is that our export industry is increasing, which is a relatively small portion of the economy, and yet everything that we pay for costs more money, and so that's why the economy keeps going down. The value of the Swiss franc declined with this announcement, but the EU markets were only temporarily calmed. Wednesday, there was more bad news, with rumors of a partial Greek default and negative assessment about the whole system nearing collapse. The European Central Bank floated the idea of the entire EU creating European-wide bond issues. Now, this is how you lose your sovereignty, as you've been talking about, step by step. there is no legal ability for them to issue a European bond because Europe really isn't a single country. It's a confederation of various states, and the treaty keeps getting stronger and stronger with each new crisis. But there's a great deal of pressure now to have a European bond because, you see, some of these weaker states have to pay as much as 30% interest in order to sell any bonds. That's what Greece has been paying. Germany's Chancellor Angela Merkel had announced the proposed sale of EU bonds which denounced it as a solution. She was correct in her denouncement. There's a strong sentiment among strong nations against having to back an EU bonding solution that forces them to subsidize the others like Greece, Spain, and Portugal that are causing the problem. Spain recently had to pay a much higher interest rate in order to sell any bonds in this week's market, offering 5.5% on a 10-year bond instead of the normal 4.8%. Last November, they had to go as high as 6% to sell bonds, and it was as low as 2.3% last June. So things are definitely heading in the negative direction. Now, mainstream investors don't care about the long-term consequences of more sovereign debt of the EU variety. They see this joint issuance of debt by the EU as the only solution, since it would reassure the markets that Europe's strongest economies were going to take responsibility for the weaker states. But as I said, currently there's no authority for the ECB to do that, and that's why every one of these people have to agree. And that's why the globalists keep pushing them to enter into a stronger compact, losing sovereignty so that they don't have to vote on these things. It's automatic, just like we've lost our state sovereignty, essentially. Here in the United States, we no longer can veto things that the federal government does on our behalf. With Germany's rejection of that, and I might say it's only because Merkel knows it would result in a vote of no confidence if she voted for it, not because, as a globalist, that she wouldn't like to go along with it. The European Central Bank will have to continue handing out direct bailouts to Greece in order to stave off the constant threat of default on the upcoming bond issues that have matured. Let me be clear. Greece, if it had to pay off all its debt, of course, couldn't do that. It's threatening default on a month-by-month basis because certain bond issues come due every month. And those direct bailouts have to keep giving Greece money so that it doesn't default on any of these issues that keep coming up for maturity, meaning that when they've reached their bond limit, they have to be paid off. And they keep trying to twist arms for these people to try to roll their debt over rather than collect their money. And most of these bond people want their money. And that's why Greece is threatening to default. So while traditional financing is demanding higher interest rates, the European Central Bank has gotten together with the Fed and decided to start injecting more dollars into Europe. That's a very interesting stance because Europe has already got a very high rate of inflation. You know, if people travel, I don't know if you've been over to Europe recently, but 5 years ago it was expensive, and most of it was expensive because of the exchange rate between the declining dollar and the rising euro. I think the last time I was there it was about $1.25 to the euro, and things were expensive. But if I priced them in dollars, if I looked at all the prices in euros and said, if I'm paying in dollars, yeah, it was a little bit more expensive, but not that much more. Now, if you go over there, everything is about twice as expensive, and it's not just because of the dollar-euro, because the euro's fallen down to 1.3 to the dollar instead of 1.5, which it was just recently. But the prices have been rising so high in Europe because of all this deficit spending by governments that it's like being in London 10 years ago. I mean, prices were double what they were in America. Now they're double in Europe. And that's really hurting American tourism. And that's why European tourists are flocking to America. I mean, it's like things are a fourth the price here. Just dirt cheap compared to Europe now.
Well, I think you're probably right, and people just, unless you understand that there is this organized effort to bring about a world government, none of this makes sense. But of course, politicians say one thing, and then they do another, and suddenly they get away with as much as they can. And then when it looks like the people are going to wake up, they'll back off, and then they'll come back again. But the ultimate goal is the consolidation of Europe into one nation, just as the ultimate goal goal is the consolidation of North America into one nation, and the same thing with South America, and ultimately the consolidation of a one world government. And when you understand that, it all makes sense. Otherwise, so much of what goes on doesn't make sense when politicians say one thing and then they do exactly the opposite. Go right ahead, Joel.
Well, I think what we're going to see in the future is a crisis a week in Europe. It's just going to keep going. It doesn't mean the EU will collapse. Globalists, in my opinion, will never allow that. Each new crisis, as you have said, will give them an excuse to tighten controls and increase the power or appeal to the states to give more power to the federated government in Brussels. Eventually, it will become a unitary government, probably not till war. Just like in the United States, we probably won't lose our liberty completely until war comes. There are plenty of cards left to play financially, including the China card. China's offering to invest billions of their excess dollars in Italy's sovereign debt, but only on condition that it set its financial house in order. Now, this is a bit ironic. Here's one socialist country demanding that another socialist country cut back social spending and raise taxes. China has a lot of problems internal to its own brand of communism. And the only reason that it can afford to lecture the world is that it is sitting on a pile of export income worth some $200 billion a year, which it must invest somewhere else. However, the affairs inside China are not rosy. Malinvestment and corruption are rampant. Social dissatisfaction is growing the more exposed Chinese urbanites find out about the West. Well, the UK Telegraph quoted one Chinese financial official as sounding like a capitalist. He said, "The incremental parts of our foreign reserve holdings should be invested in physical assets, no longer in paper." The Dow Key of the World Economic Forum at the former Port Arthur colony. That's up in Russia. We would like to buy stakes in Boeing, Intel, Apple, and other assets in America. And we should invest in these types of companies in a proactive way, meaning that we want to control them. I mean, this is very interesting. Then came the admission that China was waiting the day when it could start unloading U.S. treasuries without taking a beating. Quote, "Once the U.S. Treasury market stabilizes," and I say good luck, "we can liquidate more of our holdings of treasuries," he said. If China were to try to, this is my comment, if China were to try to unload even $100 billion in treasuries all at once, the market would drop precipitously and they would lose too much value in what remains to be sold. London business editor Ambrose Evans Pritchard said, "To my knowledge, this is the first time that a top advisor to China's central bank has uttered the word liquidate. Until now, the policy has been to diversify slowly by investing in fresh $200 billion increments each new quarter into other currencies and assets, chiefly in AAA euro debt from Germany and France. However, everyone now knows that the world's currencies are junk. The markets are all just a matter of pitting one piece of junk against another." So, of course, China is going to try to exact its pound of flesh from Europe, and I think there's a lot more strings attached to Chinese control of this, too, looking to the future when they intend to exercise hegemony over the rest of the world. It is my prognostication that this continual economic decline won't end until they bring a new world nuclear war against the United States. Now, our leaders can come out of their bunkers and say we have to start all over with a new financial and United Nations, in order to beat this great war against Russia and China.
Well, you go right ahead.
Until that time, of course, we're going to lose liberty slowly, but I'll tell you, when that wartime comes, look for a fast loss of liberties, all under the excuse of war. That's why it's very, very disturbing what happened this week in Phoenix when Mitt Romney met with conservatives in Arizona, and he came out and championed none other than Dick Cheney. Said, "That's the kind of vice president I would like to have." Boy, talk about a disqualifier in my book.
Well, it's going to be very interesting to see what happens. And certainly, poor old Perry's to bring out a lot of things about his background, which is certainly not very praiseworthy. And certainly, even some of I think it was CNN has done an investigation on him, and if that material was widely known, why he would no longer be the front runner. But of course, they will manipulate our knowledge. We will hear what we're supposed to hear. Because, you see, our minds are molded, our tastes are formed, our ideas suggested largely by those who control the media and control our reality. We'll be back in just a moment. Joel, go right ahead.
Well, one of the things that I see on the horizon is that it was very clear that there was a media push to get Perry into the race and to promote him to first front-runner Senate. They've done that. I mean, they started throwing out Perry's name into polls even before he even started talking about running for president. That means that there was a conspiracy within the establishment to get Perry. Somebody had to knock down Romney, who they don't want, obviously. But it's very interesting that even the experts, who recognize this have said, but clearly Romney came out the strong winner of the past Tea Party debate. He was much better than Perry. He was more assertive. He had better answers. He was more on his feet. Perry let Ron Paul get to him and other accusations. He was flustered. And so, they may have to rethink what this happened if Perry won't fly with the conservatives. And it's getting pretty hard for, with Romney harping, as he did in Arizona this week, on Perry's Social Security stand. I mean, I don't think anybody can get reelected on, an anti-Social Security thing. Now, Social Security it is true that it's not it's a ponzi scheme because the government has stolen the money and replaced it with IOUs. And there are no IOUs. In fact, there's no account, there's no trust fund, there's nothing. It's just all a fraud. But it's only an entitlement in the sense that government is giving benefits in excess of contributions to a wide portion of those on Social Security. Those like myself who just entered Social Security this year have paid in, well over 30, 40, I don't remember the exact figure, $50,000 into Social Security. This is not an entitlement to me. This is getting back the money that I put in there. But it is entitlement when you have somebody work 2 or 3 years and then they go off to Mexico and they start paying Social Security benefits to those people, far in excess of what the contributions or what the contributions plus a rate of return, should produce as a private pension plan. So Romney is pushing this as a private pension plan that has served us well, and it hasn't served us well, but it's not completely. But it's a combination of the two. That's what makes it a very difficult thing to both criticize and support.
Well, it's going to be interesting to see what happens. And certainly it's very interesting to hear how Ron Paul deals with that issue. When he's asked it, he always changes the subject, and he does it so skillfully, most people don't even understand. He just specifically has not answered the question.
Now, which question are you referring to?
Social Security. I mean, would you want to do away with Social Security? And Ron Paul just doesn't answer that question.
He's gotten very, very savvy about how to avoid the poison questions like conspiracy, and I mean, even on the 9/11 issue, and I know Ron Paul knows that there's an awful lot of government involvement in the 9/11 thing, but He won't touch it. He knows that they just want him to make one thing where they can write him off. They're not going to let that happen. So
I think he's doing very well. I'm sure you've seen this one poll from, I think, the first debate when CNN's own poll, of 1,000 people showed he had something like 85% of the people thought that he had won the debate. And yet, of course, this is never brought out, but except on the Internet.
Yeah, and MSNBC started out showing, 48%? But that's 80,000 votes, and then when it went to 120, it was up to 57%.
Right.
I mean, so it even increased. Well, in other political news, despite John Boehner's no new taxes pledge, the top U.S. Republican in the House will call on the special super committee to consider tax reform that would
Hold that thought. We'll be back here in just a moment here. Well, this is Dr. Stan, and suddenly I guess it's Joel Skousen, and we're talking about something what is happening. We have this super Congress, and of course, the reason this was set up, so that neither the Democrats or the Republicans would have to accept responsibility for the disastrous things that are coming down the line, which will probably involve cutting out Social Security and Medicare and increasing taxes. But they can, both parties will say, we didn't do that. Oh, that was a super Congress, and we had no control over it. But go right ahead, Joel.
Well, that's one of the reasons why I went on Social Security at 65, is because technically the full retirement age isn't until 66. They keep pushing it back, and I figured, I have this gut feeling that if I don't start on it now, I'll never get to the retirement age. They'll just keep throwing it further and further into the future. So, this is going to be a real rough ride, and I'm determined to get back some of the money I put into that ponzi scheme. But in this super committee, it's interesting. They've already blown through the 2 additional trillion that they upped the demo. They've already blown through that. And now they've got to go through and the special cuts come into place unless the special committee comes up with enough cuts to equal what they promised in this deal. Well, John Boehner and the whole House was adamant there's going to be no new taxes. Now they're using fudge language. They're talking about, we're not going to raise tax rates, but we're going to close some loopholes, but not raise taxes. Well, that just doesn't make sense. Boehner actually means throwing out actual tax deductions and exemptions in a variety of areas, very important to businesses and to individuals. The word loopholes is used by the media as a pejorative in order to make the public think he's only targeting items used by the very rich. It may not change rates, but it does push people and businesses into higher rates, and they have to pay more taxes, so it is a tax increase. Chuck Baldwin also had a very good column this week. I don't know if you saw it, about how the Christians become warmongers. And just an excellent review about how it's so easy to get Christians into this Bible-thumping, fist-pounding, go to war, punish all these nations, and especially when you throw the Muslim versus Christianity war of ideology and war of the ages before them. And of course, as Pastor Baldwin put forth, I blame this on the pastors of America. They get caught up in this. They don't know the Bible. They don't know the religion. They don't know the understanding that, Christ is certainly not a warmonger, but he's no pacifist either. He believes in the defense of rights, believes in the use of arms for limited and suitable purposes. But it's a great column if people can get a hold of Chuck Baldwin at chuckbaldwinlive.com and read that.
And I really am very, very concerned that so many Christians justify the war in Afghanistan, justify the war that is taking place took place in Iraq, and justify what we're doing over there in Egypt and Tripoli and Libya and Syria. And they justify all these things because they don't like the Muslim faith. And I don't like the Muslim faith, but that doesn't mean that we should have a right to go over there and kill all these people. And we never should have gone over. And certainly, I hold the ministers of America responsible. When was the last time you heard any minister speak out against torture and say that torture is wrong, no matter what you call it? Oh, and it doesn't matter whether, because it helped us to catch Osama bin Laden, so we could get him killed there recently. And because I think Osama bin Laden's been dead for a long period of time, there's no way you can do on a helicopter a quick DNA test to be sure that was Osama before you dumped his body, and nobody ever saw it. It's all his phone is a $3 bill. Go right ahead, Joe.
Well, let's see. Let's move on to another topic here. Finally, a Nobel scientist stood up to the global warming crowd. Nothing is more symptomatic of how political correctness has captured the scientific community than their absolute refusal to countenance any dissent within their professional journals or associations of the rigidly enforced and mostly falsified proposition that global warming is an extreme problem and that it's man-made use of carbon that is the pollutant. Well, thousands of credible scientists have protested and even joined scientist Arthur Robinson in signing a formal petition rebutting the theory. But the elitists in the scientific community who control the media, or at least who control the scientific communities and journals and professional associations, are in league with the media. They've been highly successful in ignoring or treating these thousands of scientists like bumpkins. Now it's hard to ignore a highly regarded Nobel Prize winner in physics who says it's all a bunch of bunk.
Yes, I saw that, and I was rather proud of this gentleman. Anyway, but of course, the thing is, this is one of the greatest frauds ever perpetrated. But the nice thing is, there are an awful lot of people who know that the scientists are lying, and they're really getting more and more skeptical of what we're getting to the media. So I'm encouraged that, certainly I think that probably almost half the people really don't believe in this global warming myth. Well, our guest is, of course, Joel Skousen. We'll be back here in just a moment, right here at the Radio Liberty. Well, Joel, you go right ahead.
I just want to tell you, Stan, I enjoy that interlude so much each time we have an interview here on Radio Liberty.
Well, I enjoy it too, but
so much, so often I have to endure this rock bumper music when I'm being interviewed by other people, and have something truly spiritual, and it draws at your soul. It's just soothing and pleasant. Thank you very much.
Well, it's my pleasure. I enjoy it myself. That's the reason that we play it, and I get a chance to hear it every day. Anyway, go right ahead, Joel.
Well, Dr. Ivor Giovert, a former professor of Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute in the 1973 winner of the Nobel Prize in Physics, abruptly announced his resignation to the premier physics society in the world in disgust for its officially stated policy that global warming is occurring. But what really ticked Giovert off was the outrageous claim by the APS that the evidence is incontrovertible. How many times we hear this from politicians, like Obama or Al Gore, it's beyond dispute. The debate is over. We hear that time that they're just trying to crush debate by saying that you're stupid if you continue to debate this issue. Well, he wasn't going to take that. In his statement, Giovert pointed out the hypocrisy of it all. He says in the APS, it is okay to discuss whether the mass of the proton changes over time and how a multi-universe behaves, but the evidence of global warming is incontrovertible, he demands. The claim is that temperature has changed from approximately 288.0 to 288.8 degree Kelvin in about 150 years. He says, which, if true, means to me that the temperature has been amazingly stable, not dangerously changing, and that we've definitely improved human life during this warming period. Fox News comments that the use of the word incontrovertible has already caused debate within the group, so much so that an addendum was added to the statement discussing its use in their April 2010 dissertation on global warming. What APS did was merely limit the application of incontrovertible to the climate change number, 0.18 degrees Celsius, instead of the entire global warming.
Hold that thought. Well, this is Dr. Stan. I guess it's Joel Skousen, and we were just discussing, of course, the fact that this Nobel Prize winner had actually resigned from a very prestigious scientific organization because of their ridiculous statement that there was just no question at all that global warming was a reality. And we'll get back to that in a moment. But before we do that, Joel, I want you to tell our listeners how they could subscribe to World Affairs Brief, or at least get a copy of it before they decide to subscribe. But I can assure you that it's well worthwhile. Secondly, I want to tell our listeners about your 3 books, which we carry, the one on strategic relocation, the one on the secure home. Go right ahead.
Thanks, Dr. Stan. My work for the World Affairs Brief is by subscription, but I do allow people to get a free sample issue by emailing me at editor@worldaffairsbrief.com. People can review my work. It's a synopsis of the current brief, and also a lot of the daily news stories that are important, although we've been out of state and on the road working on a special project, so that hasn't been kept up as well as it could. But people can see that showcased on my website, worldaffairsbrief.com. On my other website, joelskousen.com, people can view a listing of all of my books and detail about them. My premier book is The Secure Home. It's big as a telephone book, over 700 pages, and everything from A to Z on high-security construction and remodeling, as well as self-sufficiency, generators, solar, water power, wind power, alternate fuel, equipment for your home, a complete listing of just thousands of special pieces of equipment that are hard to find. My bestseller is the book Strategic Relocation, in particular the new 3rd edition, which has just been put out. It's all-new color map edition, about 3/4 new text, a complete section on international retreat. People are just giving this book very high reviews for answering questions about relocation that they've been asking for so many years. And it also covers a lot of contingency planning for people who can't actually relocate from their city job, and how to deal with that. The last book is about how to do a safe room within a basement. It's an architectural plan book called How to Implement a High Security Shelter in the Home. And all three of these books can be ordered through Radio Liberty.
And we, by calling 1-800-544-8927, that's 1-800-544-8927, and they are really among the most popular books out there as far as orders that we get. Anyway, go right ahead, Joel. You were talking about this Nobel Prize winner that basically said this whole situation is so ridiculous, and that the organization he'd been with for many years, he finally said, I'm just not going to put up with this anymore. And the fact that you would come up with a statement, this is incontrovertible, just is not scientific. So go ahead.
And so what the APS does is try to limit the application of what they used incontrovertibly to just simply the temperature change claim of 0.818 degrees. Well, this is both disingenuous and untrue, since they clearly intended to shut down debate on the warming issue with the use incontrovertible. And the temperature data is one of the most controversial aspects, as evidence has emerged that the numbers were tampered with or skewed and refuse to now show the current cooling trend that's going on. It's hardly incontrovertible.
And we are getting global cooling, and this is the most amazing thing. I mean, certainly here in California where I live, it's obviously much cooler now than I can remember. At this time of year, we should be having a great deal of very hot weather. We have not had the hot spell here in September that we ordinarily have, and everything suggests we're going to have a very cold winter, but it doesn't matter that we're getting global cooling. They're going to blame the global cooling on the global warming, and of course everybody knows global warming leads to global cooling. That's incontrovertible. I mean, everything is so, it's sort of like that old adage, that Woody Allen, when his wife comes home, finds him in bed with her best friend, and Woody Allen says, it's not what you think, are you going to believe me, or are you going to believe your lying eyes? And this is exactly what's going on today, ladies and gentlemen. Feel the temperature and then tell me that, of course, it's all global warming. Go ahead, Joel.
I have to ask permission to steal that line from my brief. Everyone knows that global warming leads to global cooling. Right. It's incontrovertible. That is brilliant, Dr. Stan. I'll give you credit for it.
Well, thank you very much. But go right ahead.
Okay, but let's talk about this amazing push to do a jobs bill. I mean, I can't believe the incredible dogma and dogmatic nature in which Obama tried to shove this thing down the American people's throat, demanding that Congress pass this thing immediately so that we can get people back to work, once again trying to cut off debate. Well, the temptation to lavish newly printed money on the public during a recession is just too powerful for most politicians. Bush did it once. Obama's literally demanding, that Congress pass this new jobs proposal to once again shovel money towards new infrastructure projects around the U.S. In coming out here east for this project I'm dealing with my crew, I recently drove across country and found the entire nation was being torn up with new freeway projects and bridge replacements. I mean, you can't hardly go 20 miles without running into these warning signs about the fines doubled and yellow cones and one-lane traffic across the freeways. I don't know how it is in California, but that's the way it is across the country.
Well, I don't get out that much. I'm doing 5 hours talk radio a day. I'm not on the highway a great deal, but you go right ahead. I will take your word for it. Basically, of course, the whole idea that you can bring prosperity by increased spending is totally ridiculous. You can't spend your way into financial solvency. Go ahead.
Well, obviously there are hundreds of thousands of jobs being maintained by all this paying for construction projects, and yet the economy is still shrinking. So we must consider whether or not government can, as you say, create jobs by deficit spending, and also whether it's sapping another side of the economy with the tax of rising prices that all this new money causes. You see, because all these new worker spending raises prices, and those of us without jobs or people who've been out of work, they can't raise their prices. In fact, they have declining savings, and so that increase in prices really does hurt people with fixed or declining income. Peter Schiff offers this. He says, although it was labeled as hyped as a jobs plan, the new $447 billion initiative announced last night by President Obama is merely another government stimulus plan. That's absolutely right. Despite the fact that this plan bears no substantive difference from previous stimulus bills, in fact, it's funding mostly construction, the President never once mentioned the word stimulus in his hour-long speech. Obviously, it's a bad name. He knows that words count. Like all previous stimuli, this round of borrowing and spending will act as an economic sedative rather than a stimulant, right shift. Running up the deficit in the short term will not grow the economy, but will merely dig it in a deeper hole. A year from now, there will be even more unemployed Americans as there are today, likely resulting in additional deficit spending stimulus that will again make the situation worse. Well, another possible result is the government will continue to add more make-work jobs until a larger and larger proportion of the economy is directly funded by government checks. Now, that is exactly what happened in Germany. Remember, the hyperinflation started at the period when Germany started to pay all of the workers who were in the French-German border industrial area, which, after World War I, it was occupied by France, and the Germans went on strike, and then the French locked them out, and so the government started to pay all these German workers directly their paychecks, even though they weren't working. And it involved now getting the government in directly paying individuals. And that's where hyperinflation started, because as prices rose and wages weren't sufficient, government just upped the wages. And so this became a vicious cycle. So prices were allowed to rise very rapidly because people could pay those rising prices. Unlike here, where we have stagflation, people cannot pay the increased prices. And so they're spending less, and that's why the economy is getting worse. I mean, I just had a very talented engineer lose his job because of declining work in the engineering field. And I think 2 of my sons have lost their jobs, engineers, once again, because of that. Unfortunately, my work has picked up, so I've been able to employ them. But still, this is happening all across the nation, and there aren't any other jobs to get to replace them with.
But not only that, but of course a lot of engineering, or some of our engineering, is actually being done in India and in other countries, and they're actually sending the jobs over there, and so they get the planning done, and then of course maybe they need engineers to facilitate it, but the planning can be done in other countries today. And of course this is putting more and more of our engineers out of, and our architects out of work.
Well, that's right. There can be no doubt that some jobs will be created by this plan. But these are government-created jobs. They are not permanent jobs. It is, however, much more difficult to identify the jobs that these plans and government programs destroy or prevent from coming into existence. Now, that's because the victims of government wealth redistribution are always invisible to economists who see only the macroeconomic aggregate. In fact, to the persons closest to the job loss, it looks as if the free market has failed to keep them employed. So not only is freedom is the victim of all this, it gets the blame stand for the declining economy.
And of course,
comes to the rescue.
Somebody remarked recently that what President Obama is advocating is actually creating permanent tax increases to produce temporary new jobs, and because it just doesn't work. These are going to be they're going to be permanent tax increases by taking out the loopholes, and they're going to be permanent, but the jobs are only going to be temporary. Go right ahead.
Now, there's some specific commentary that Peter Schiff makes about the perverse incentives of the tax credits that Obama talked about. And they sounded wonderful. There's a $4,000 tax credit for hiring new workers who have been unemployed for 6 months or more. I mean, this is a big incentive, it appears. The subsidy may make little difference, of course, affecting the high end of the job market. An employer will not pay a worker $50,000 per year simply to qualify for a one-time $4,000 credit. But the effects will be felt on the minimum wage jobs. Since an employer need only lure a worker for 6 months to get the credit for a full-time employee, he's going to be induced to bring on people at minimum wage so that he qualifies for the credit. You see, he gains $4,000, and then he lays them off again after 6 months. He's fulfilled the minimum thing of the rules. Of course, the numbers get even more compelling for employers to provide returning veterans with temporary minimum wage jobs as the higher $5,600 tax credit effectively reduces the minimum wage job to $1.87 per hour. If an employer hires a wounded warrior, the tax credit is $9,600, which effectively reduces the 6 month minimum wage by $9.23 per hour to a negative $1.98 per hour, meaning that essentially if he only hires the wounded warrior for 6 months, the government pays him $1.98 per hour. This will encourage, says Schiff, employers to hire a wounded warrior, even if there's nothing for him to do except sit around. Such an incentive may even encourage such individuals to acquire multiple no-show jobs from numerous employers. History has shown that when government creates incentives, the public will twist themselves into pretzels to qualify for the benefits. That's brilliant.
Yes, it is. And unfortunately, there's no problem facing America today that a new government program won't make worse. And this is no solution. I mean, certainly communism doesn't work. It didn't work in Russia. It didn't work in China, and it's certainly not going to work here. Go ahead.
But moving from the sublime to the ridiculous, says Schiff, the president claims his payroll tax cuts, which he also talked about in the speech, will not endanger the Social Security Trust Fund, as the government will replace the lost contributions with transfers from general revenue. Well, what general revenue? Where are there any surplus in general revenue to transfer? In other words, the government will borrow money, put in a phony trust fund, then borrow the same money back from the trust fund and spend it on the stimulus. It's amazing the theatrics the government will go through to maintain the illusion that the trust fund actually exists.
I agree with you, but I have heard people say, well, there really is a trust fund. Anybody who says there isn't a trust fund is just trying to frighten people. But what is the trust fund? Well, it's government bonds. Well, where's the money there for the government bond? Well, the government's got to come up with it. But the government doesn't have any money. That's what they're having, going out and borrow $4 to $5 billion every day so that they can pay off the bonds so they can pay Social Security. The government's borrowing money today to pay Social Security and Medicare benefits. And the average individual who's getting them has no idea they're living on borrowed money. They're living on their grandchildren's future. Go ahead.
Well, you know, the government doesn't even go through the facade of printing up bonds and storing them anywhere for the so-called trust fund. It's just a paper entry. It's just a numerical entry in a computer. There is no trust fund. And, of course, the head of the FDIC during the George H.W. Bush administration, when I guess, was it James Baker was the Secretary of Treasury, called up and asked where his trust fund and money was. And Baker said, well, I hate to tell you this, but there isn't any. You know, it's just an accounting gimmick. There is no bank account where the money is kept. We've got that on record now. Well, you know, one of the biggest problems, Sam, with government spending, spreading the wealth, is they never do it in a disinterested way. The temptation to hand money to favored friends and business associates or political supporters is just too great. And that's what the latest scandal involving Solyndra, the bankrupt solar manufacturer, touted as leading the green revolution. Bruce Crafting of Zero Hedge unraveled this tainted connection. He said, I wrote about the panel manufacturer Solyndra last week. Government investment disaster in the works. It was pretty clear to me that that company was facing a lot of trouble, had negative outlook, and wasn't going to make a profit. I had no idea, he said, that they would file bankruptcy the very next day. He says, sometimes you really get lucky. I've been looking for a confirmation about the connection between Obama bagman George Kaiser and this scandal. Kaiser's a very big fundraiser for Obama. He's often referred to as a bundler. In this case, that means he encourages and pushes others to put up money for Obama's campaign. The bankruptcy filing indicated that Argonaut Ventures, an investment arm of the Tulsa-based foundation run by Kaiser, holds almost 39% of Solyndra's parent organization, 360 Solar Degree Holdings. So who's behind Argonaut? In an emailed statement to the Tulsa World, a representative of the Kaiser Family Foundation said the organization made the investment through Argonaut. So the Family Foundation was the source of the money that Argonaut used to get Solyndra going. This is just a multiple shell game, Stan, to cover the fact that this is coming from George Kaiser. But George Kaiser tried to distance themselves. His spokesperson said, Kaiser is not an investor in Solyndra and did not participate in any discussions with the U.S. government regarding the loan.
Well, you know, there's so much dishonesty out there. I don't know if you saw that exchange with Governor Perry, you know, but certainly Michelle Bachmann, when somebody suggested that he had suddenly mandated the use of the Gardasil vaccine put up by Merck, and Perry's remark was, well, I'm offended that anyone would suggest I would sell out for $5,000. And the reply would have been, well, if you won't sell it for $5,000, how much would it take for you to sell it? But nobody actually said that, but a lot of people thought it. We'll be back here in just a moment to wrap up the program. Ladies and gentlemen, America's in real trouble today. We've got to reach the public and get them thinking. Well, Joel, you've got 3 minutes to wrap up the program.
Well, it's interesting to track this down. Kaiser is doing his level best to distance themselves from all this political stink, but it does not work for me, says Krasting. George Kaiser is chairman of BOK Financial Corp. And owner of Kaiser Francis Oil Company. Argonaut is headed by Steve Mitchell, who's also serving on Solindra's board of directors. So the guy, Kaiser's foundation gives the money to Argonaut, who's headed by Steve Mitchell, who's also on the board of Solyndra, and Argonaut gives $300 million to Solyndra. So Kaiser wants us to believe that the family foundation invested some $300 million in the family's excess cash and did not really know about it, that he had nothing to do with it. The guys who are running the family's investments, Steve Mitchell, is also sitting on the board of Solyndra. No connection. We're supposed to believe that he was just a passive investor? Not a chance, he said. Well, there's also, no shortage of companies. There are 2 other companies that have received stimulus money. Evergreen Solar received $5.3 million to open a solar production facility in 2007 that employed roughly 800 people. That company, once a rock star in the solar industry, filed for bankruptcy last month. And so did SpectraWatt, based in New York, a solar cell company that spun out of Intel. It received a $500,000 grant from the National Energy Renewal Lab, and it's also filing bankruptcy last month. So it looks like, and all of these are claiming that they cannot compete with their Chinese competitors, which receive considerable government and financial support. And each of these companies are filing for bankruptcy, and guess what? They're going to reform and build plants in China.
I'm not in the least bit surprised. We're doing everything we can to transfer our industrial production to China. And when are the American people going to wake up? We're creating the best enemy money could buy. And what they ought to do, in my estimation, is charge any American corporation who goes over there 35% income tax and corporate tax and no tax here. That would give them a real incentive to stay here. But go right ahead.
Well, that's all I have for today's interview. I guess we're just about out of time. It's always a pleasure to be with you, Stan.
Well, God bless. I hope if you have any question, I used to be a doctor. Give me a call. We'll look forward to hearing from you if there's anything we can do to help. Or get to some of the things that we take that keep us going. Why, you know how to reach us. Anyway.
Thank you very much, Stan. Appreciate the offer.
God bless. Thanks very much, and give my best to your boys. Okay, well, this is Dr. Stan, and Sydney Joel is always a pleasure to have with us here at Radio Liberty as we analyze, and I think his analysis of what's going on is excellent. We'll be back in just a moment. Well, this is Dr. Stan, and we do hope, of course, you enjoy Joel's analysis, and I think that his analysis of what's going on in Europe is absolutely accurate. Everybody says that certainly Greece is going to default, but certainly that would be the logical thing to do. That would be what should be done. That would solve the problem, but they don't want to solve the problem. They want to unite Europe under one control. So I think that we're going to have to watch very carefully what goes on over there, but just because everybody says Greece is going to default doesn't necessarily mean that's what's going to happen. The ultimate goal is to consolidate the nations of Europe into one super-state, and then eventually to unite them with the other super-states into a one-world government. It's all about a one-world government, a one-world currency, a one-world religion, and the destruction of Christianity. And when you understand this is a conspiracy against God, it all begins to make sense. Well, this is the time when I need to remind our listeners that my ministry of Radio Liberty's primarily listener supported, and if you're in a position to help, would love to hear from you. Our number 1-800-544-8927. This is also the time when, of course, people begin to get cold and flu, and you really need to have things on hand for your health. And certainly Barbara and I, well, if we start to come down with a cold or the flu, why don't we take something called allibiotic? It's a combination of oil of oregano, elderberry juice, garlic, and a couple of other things. And that and a couple of 1 or 2 vitamin D, actually 5,000 units, take it every 4 hours. And ordinarily, of course, well, I haven't missed a day behind the microphone here in many, many years. So if you'd be interested in getting allibiotic and vitamin D3, they are available through Radio Liberty. We have a whole line of health products we take, certainly for men who are at that difficult time of life. Why prostate support keeps you from having to get up at night frequently, at least it's helped me. And for women, we have the menopause support, and for people who are having problems with the immune system, we have immune support. They're all put out by certainly one of the world's leading health food manufacturing products. And if you'd like to know more, give us a call at 1-800-544-8927, 1-800-544-8927. That's allibiotic and vitamin D3, and you need to have these things on hand. And if it's of life for the winter, and we send them to members of our family. And in fact, we send them to a lot of the people who actually come onto our programs, and they're having difficulty. We want to keep them in good health so they can be frequent guests, and so we provide them with these various products, and of course they're all very appreciative. If you'd like to know more, call us at 1-800-544-8927. We also carry the Berkey products. We carry the Miracle 2 soap products. Of course, you go to our website, radioliberty.com. That's radioliberty.com, and certainly you'll find a list of all the things we have. And if you want to know more, you can always call that 800 number, 1-800-544-8927. Well, if you want to remind you that we're having our all-day conference, it's going to be on the 23rd of October. We're bringing in some excellent speakers from across the country. We do hope that you're going to be able to come and certainly meet people from across the country, get ideas, get products, get ideas on the material that Radio Liberty offers that will give you the information you need to be able to discuss intelligently with your friends or people you meet what's really going on in the world today. So that's October 23rd. If you're going to need rooms, well, you're going to have to call really this week, because, of course, first of next week, I think it's on the 22nd of September that they give up the rooms. So we put aside a block of rooms. You'll get at a special reduced rate. So we hope you can make it. That's October 23rd, and give us a call at 1-800-544-8927, 1-800-544-8927. We ask you to pray for America, to pray for revival, but please pray for Radio Liberty, our provision and our protection.